The question I chose to research about was are we so afraid of animated shows and movies? We know they're fake, but we still have the same reaction to them as if it was real. I wanted to start with the biology aspect of fear. I wanted to know what part of the brain causes us to react to it. Looking at the nervous system, we can see that there's two different types of systems. On the picture to the left, there is a rational part, and there is called the whatever part I can't pronounce properly. But anyway, the part of the brain that we're going to focus on first is the emotional part of the brain, which is the second part that I can't pronounce very well. In it, there are two lobes specifically. And the first one is the one that starts with the A at the very bottom that I also cannot pronounce. But that is the part of the brain that causes your flight or flight response. As pretty much the involuntary reaction to whatever's going on. The next part of the brain that causes a fear response is called the hippocampus, which is right above the part we just talked about. This part of the brain tells us if it is a fake threat or if it's real. So this part reacts to our emotional state at the time that we view what we're looking at. So this is why when we see something like a bear in the middle of the woods, we see it as dangerous, but yet if we see them in the zoo, we see it as cute or fluffy or something. When these two lobes work together, it's pretty much telling us what kind of threat it is and then how we're supposed to react to it. So now taking this information and bringing it to the rational part, it's more of our rational brain now needs to come in and tell us more information about what's going on so that it can calm the emotional part of our brain. Because our emotional part doesn't take in critical information the same way that our rational does. The rational side is our cognitive side, and that's pretty much telling us if it's something that we should actually be afraid of or not. The only problem with this is that our rational part of our brain doesn't fully develop until we're around the age of 25. So the younger we are, the more we can't perceive if something is real or not. So to a young child under the age of 6 or so, any sort of animation that will depict anything that revolves around death, anything death of a parent, anything cute that has harm to it, they'll perceive that as a real threat and they'll take it as if it's actually happening to them. As we get older, though, it develops more, which is why our fears become more centered on what actually scares us. But at this point, that part of our brain is still not fully developed, so we're still scared of things that we see if they center around negative emotion, because at this point, the emotional side of our brain is more developed than the rational part. So if we're viewing something, whether it be real or fake, and it has negative emotions involved, our brain will react negatively. So that's why when we see certain things like ads on television, like the animal one where everybody cries and that song comes on, we're getting a negative emotion and our brains are reacting negatively by feeling sad because we're viewing that as a real animal, they're really sick, they're in a really bad situation, so our brain will react in a negative response to that. But as we get older, the rational part of our brain will start to take more control over situations like this because the logical part of our brain is what calms the emotional part. Because our emotions take a much larger role in being scared than a logical point, the rational side needs to take control over that. But because it doesn't develop until later in life, it's harder for us to see the difference at a younger age. Another part of why we fear things is because of our memory. As your brain is developing in the younger years, if you see something that had a strong enough effect on you, your brain will remember it and still give you that same flight or flight response as you get older. So that's why people who are in their older ages, like 20 and older, are still afraid of certain things because they remember it as being scared. Even though now they can rationalize that it really isn't that bad. They'll still remember it, and their brain will still give them the same response. Now, getting into the animated side of fear, I wanted to bring up things that used to scare people and not scare people now. So in the top left corner, there is an image from a show. And as you can see, the character is obviously very animated. It has very small facial features compared to its eyes, which are almost double the size. And the shape of the face is nothing compared to an actual person. So for someone who is more mentally mature, they won't be afraid of an image like this because their brain can rationally see that it is not even close to anything realistic. On the left side, there is an image from a comic that has a lot more detail, is in black and white, and the facial features are a lot more to scale of an actual person. This would scare someone who is older because the rational side of the brain, even though it's not 100% developed, but way more developed than someone younger, would still be frightened of an image like this because it is close enough to an actual person where it'll confuse the rational side of the brain and tell us that it is a very real possibility something like this can actually happen. As we get older, the way we fear things isn't the same way we fear things as we're younger. So it's not based off of images and noises as it would be for a small child. It's more of things that could happen to us in our near future. So in the comic that is referenced in the left side, there's a story in there that frightened a lot of people when it first came out. And it was about a town that went in complete chaos over a spiral flower that grew everywhere. And after a while, the people of the town started developing weird spiral patterns on their bodies, on their houses, on the food that they ate. Pretty much spirals just kind of completely took over their small town. The reason why this comic was so frightening to people was not because of the actual spirals itself, because it's just a shape. It's more of how the town was so easily taken over by it. Pretty much the life that they had was completely taken over by something that they didn't understand. And people of the town started becoming scared of it because they didn't understand what was going on. So it wasn't the shape that made the comic scary, it was that the only emotion centered around these shapes was a negative emotion. So it told the reader that you should fear this because the only people are reacting to it is in a fearful way. So the only information our logical brain is getting is a negative response. So it will react negatively, thus making the emotional side of the brain only react negatively, causing our fight or flight. With the information I've been able to gather so far with my research, the reason why we're so afraid of animated things, even though that we know they're fake, is because we can't tell our logical brain and our emotional brain that they are. Consciously, we know that they're not real, but logically, we can't make our brain believe that because the emotions that we get are still very much real. That's why when we view a movie when we're older, we may turn on the light just to kind of let us know that there's nothing really there. Even as a child, we may have cried. Because as long as we only get a negative emotion of something, we'll only ever react negatively. Now, our reaction may change as we get older, but our brain will still function the same way as it did when we were younger. Through memory of what scared us, through the events that scared us, and how we reacted to it. So it can look any way it wants, but as long as it presents itself in the same way and triggers the same parts of our brain, we'll always react the same way.